Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, co-founder, Cammy. Hey there, Cammy.
Hey, Bryant, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I guess
I'm
it would
fine
already be
doing
that
well.
at this point, right?
Yeah.
No, excellent. I'm doing really well. I'm excited about today's topic. We pick myths, legends, stories. We've been hitting a lot of the classic kind of myth stuff lately. A few Greeks, myths, and some buglebears and all that. And now we're going to talk about. We've had some success in like ancient uh, Chinese myth, and we're returning to that in a way, talking about the accredited founder of what Daoism as a philosophy, also a religious Daoism, but he's known as Lao Tzu, which isn't really even a name. Did you know that? Well, I mean, it's a name, but it's not like Bob. Um,
Right.
yeah. So I'm really excited about this. I like would read about Taoism a lot when I was younger, and I still kind of do now, and I was always been fascinated by it. I don't know if you've ever. This is probably your first time really looking into it. Yeah.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember everyone had that book, the Tao of Pooh.
Yes. Yeah. That was a really great Western. I listened to the audiobook maybe a year ago now. Really
Oh,
well done. Yeah. It was a really good like way to bring it into like Western thought. With examples and stuff. Yeah, it's really that's why I'm glad you mentioned that. I completely forgot that book existed. No, it's really good. I'll look up who the author is and mention it before the show's done, because that is really worth reading if you want to look into philosophical Taoism. It's definitely a great stepping stone. So, but as the show goes, Cammy will give us a story related to to Lao Tzu. She's gonna explain Taoism. Um, and then afterwards, I'll kind of lead a little discussion on this pretty mythical figure. So I'm excited. But Cammy, why don't you take it away?
yeah, absolutely. So I use the worldsreligionsprofessors.com, their Lao Tzu article, and then also, of course, Wikipedia. Many tapestries tell the story of the wise old sage Lao Tzu. He was born both an old man and a babe, but he became tired of the misguided bureaucracy and bad judgment in his home country. He gathered his belongings and his boy apprentice and packed up his things on a water buffalo who carried the pair west to the desert. As they traveled, a thin vapor began to emit from the sage, and the more lost in thought he became, the larger the vapor cloud. It soon reached well ahead of the party to the guard of the pass. The guard knew a wise man and a sage was approaching from the thick mist. So he set his mind to learn from the wise one. When Lao Tzu finally approached, days after the warning signal reached the border, the guard had pleaded with him not to leave China but to stay and share his knowledge with the people. Lao Tzu was not interested in staying in his country, but he knew the guard would not let him leave without sharing his insights. So he managed to turn back along the path and find a village to stay in for the night. While he was there, he procured some long scrolls and began to write. After several nights had passed, the wise man was finished recording his teachings. He then rode again to the edge of China, where the border guard again stopped him. This time, he produced his papers, and the guard eagerly took his ideas so that he might learn wisdom and permitted the sage to pass. Lao Tzu left his land and vowed not to return, but his knowledge guided the people of China for millennia in the form of the Tao Te Ching.
It is a tricky word. uh, and yeah, so you'll see like yeah the Tao like it's that Tao. I believe that from my what I've heard, it's kind of pronounced with like a bit of a D. So Dao De Jing.
Okay.
So just yeah, just as like a heads up, you'll see that because sometimes it's even seen as like one word, and it's literally just D's instead of T's. Dao De Jing. So
I should have asked you before I
no,
read that. I
it.
forgot it was in there.
Yeah, I played the Dynasty Warriors games, and that's about half of my like how to correctly pronounce these Chinese names like experience was from that, and that's about it. And then, like I said, I've listened to a few, like I listened to the Tao of Pooh, and I've listened to a few other like books, or read a few other books on it and stuff like that. And by the that so the Tao, I forgot the Tao of Pooh. It's written by Benjamin Hoff. That book came out in 1982. I can't believe that.
Oh, wow.
That's really awesome. Yeah. Um, because I mean, our Taoism, like seeping into Western culture, wasn't a fast thing for sure. I mean, but I believe it. Really worth looking at, and not very long, but really good. It's kind of wild how well Fat Bear is a great exemplar of Taoism. But kid bears aside, so Lao Tzu is so that name essentially kind of means like Master Lao, or Old Lao. The Z or the Zu, however you've seen it, it could be written in many different ways. Essentially, kind of means master, and Lao means old. So, kind of at its base, it means old master. There's some other ways too that it can be interpreted. Some people believe that it kind of means like old boy, basically, which is kind of like in some ideas of Taoism, like your best like modes of thought are when you're like a little innocent kid or an old part of a man. So that's like the way it goes. So it's kind of like seen, some people interpret it that way for that reason. You might even see the Tzu part, Lao Tzu, Sun Tzu, Master Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War in the 5th century. So that you're going to see that name a lot too. I think even Confucius, which is a Romanization of Kong Tzu as well, Master Kong. So Confucius wasn't his name. So just to kind of give you a timeline, yeah, I just mentioned that Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War in the 5th century BC. I think everyone kind of knows that. And the Han Dynasty, which I believe we talked about during the Guan Yu episode we did, that dynasty, one of the most famous dynasties, the Imperial Han Dynasty, was from the 4th century BC to the 4th century AD. That so just to kind of place where we are right now, because what the evidence that we have of Lao Tzu comes from this man. His name is Sima Chan, or Chan, Qian. I believe that the Q gives it a ch sound. This man, he's incredibly important for what we know about Lao Tzu and the stories of his time. He was a historian who wrote about this around 100 BC. So kind of getting into the Han Dynasty, it's pretty young, but he's the one who's writing about it. And he wrote this incredible piece called The Records of the Historian. It covers about 2,000 years of history and was a model of historical writing for Asia, in China and Japan up until the 20th century. So this was an extremely well done work, extremely important and very influential. And it's where we get a lot of the stories from. Now, it's I wanted to talk about this and kind of put it in part with, we talk about so much Roman and Greek stuff. I can't remember. We talked recently about a philosopher, a Greek philosopher, heavily. I can't remember who it was. So Cammy, shout it out if you remember. But Aristotle, Homer, we mentioned countlessly. Homer of the 6th century BCE. Try and think like across I don't know, across Asia from Greece. This is kind of when this is happening. These analogous times. That's kind of what I want you to have in your head. So I mean, Sima Chan living around. He was born around 145, lived until about 86 BCE. So I mean, we're smack into Roman stuff at that point. Going heavy into the empire. The Christianization is on its way soon. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to bring that into your heads to think about. But what's crazy about Master Lao is we have several sources. This is sort of the oldest that we have, is from Sima Chan. We don't have too much more, but the things are really well documented here. I mean, if Sima Chan's writing about 2,000 years of history, a lot of it's going to be kind of fictitious, in the same way as like Greek philosophers would use Zeus as in a historical sense. It's sort of like that, but it's really wild to see that. And so the Lao Tzu is really accredited for writing the Tao Te Ching, like you mentioned, and it's tough to say. I used Britannica Wikipedia. There's also this bit from Stanford EDU and IEP.utm.edu that helped me kind of get some of these things. it seems like it's not possible. Like in the 20th century, when a lot of these things got unearthed and Western interest really rose in it, and modern historical practices came, it just kind of seemed like this isn't possible for this person to have written these things, because these stories, either like some of the writings don't match timeline wise, and it just doesn't seem like it's possible. So I think historically, it's sort of one of those things where it's like Master Lao Tzu wasn't an individual, or if he was, he didn't do everything that we believe he did, but certainly his influence is there, and that's concrete enough. And it was so early. I mean, it was 2,000 years ago that it cemented in society that it practically is real. And like I said, there's religious Taoism, and then there's philosophical Taoism. Like the Pooh book is based off of philosophical Taoism, but there are people who take it a little more seriously. I know I mentioned it once. There's the video game Warriors Orochi, Cammy. I'm sure you remember
Yeah,
that. And in the newest or the latest two or three, they included like Zeus and Poseidon. They included like gods in it, because it was
sure.
based. The villain was this Japanese demon Orochi, this like god demon Orochi. That's who you had to fight. And they started including, and they include, I don't remember what figure they picked from Taoism, but they include Taoist like figures in this and stuff like that. So it's like a big deal. I mean, it would, the equivalent would be like if Jesus was in the game. I'm just like saying, like if he just showed up and was like had a cross like with blades on, he's like, I'm ready. Um,
Like when he
so
was fighting Thor.
yes, yeah, when Jesus and Thor briefly fought, as per that one Iceland, or I can't remember that philosopher, or that writer. I remember that now. That was, yeah, that was an
Wasn't
old
it like
reference.
a poem
It
by a lady
it
actually?
was a woman who wrote that. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was like, you know what, I'm gonna prove it. What was she proving? Was she proving Jesus was tougher? I can't even remember now.
I
Well,
think it was like the Thor. Didn't Thor win?
I think that was the point of it. I think it was
Yeah,
trying to like a
I
pagan
don't
revival sort of thing.
remember.
Well, it's funny because the battle between sort of religious and philosophical, it's not quite there, but there has been some friction, mainly between, so Buddhism heavily took over China as a land. Saying China is tough. It's not exactly, it wasn't unified until very recently. And but still, Buddhism was kind of the main sort of religion, with Confucianism as well, Confucius philosophy. Confucius, by the way, just to kind of give us the timeline, he lived 551 to 479 BCE. So Confucius is right around the time of Lao Tzu's like understanding of him. We believe he was born around traditionally the 6th century, sometimes the 4th century BCE. He died around the 5th century. It's tough because it's just not, we don't have the same kind of sources that we do for someone like Confucius as a figure. But I loved, one point I really want to make here, or the point I really want to show, is how did this guy become so, like, why do we still talk about him? We talk about Confucius because his writings were very exact philosophies. He had students. It was very direct, and the primary sources are very direct. These primary sources aren't so direct. Simotron's piece, the historical piece, is there. What really seems to have done it is what Wikipedia calls hagiographies, which means, I believe, like saintly biographies. Hagio, like the Hagia Sophia, means like holy. And we usually talk about this in a Christian sense of like the life. A hagiography is like the life of a saint. So they use that term here too because of the philosophical religious connection. But there were these throughout the next 2,000 years, where we have all these hagiographies of Lao Tzu, people making connections to him. There was this. So one really important thing was in 147 CE, Emperor Huan built a palace on a traditional site of Lao Tzu's birthplace and authorized veneration and sacrifice. So that was a really big deal. And a few years before that, in 79 BC, there was this book, The Lives of the Immortals, by Li Xuanzhuan, by which venerated him, and one of another sort of like philosophical figure, Yin, who was said in this piece to be like his student, and they were said to be kind of immortal. So there was this piece, then there's this sort of like ripple effect of these teachings, and then just the right people at the right time were able to say, yeah, this is a big deal, especially when an emperor does it and venerates the site. The statues started being made. There are statues around of him today, and it became a bigger and bigger deal. So it was really cool to see that. But the hagiographies, those like people writing about it much later, it's sort of like it reminds me of Virgil writing about everyone, that's really what I see. One thing I love that I have to mention is there is a work known by the title. This is like a direct translation: the supreme numinous treasures, sublime classic on Laozi's conversion of the barbarians. um, this is what the IEP.UCM.edu says the probably the most inflammatory work. This was done by this group called the Celestial Masters. I can't remember the name of the gentleman who wrote this, but this group was into the religious aspect of Daoism, which is still a thing today and is absolutely important. It says that Laozi left China through the Western Pass, going to India, and transmorphed into the original historical Buddha and converted the barbarians. Again, barbarians I think is a loose term, meaning like
Okay,
everyone out
so
there.
I saw that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw where they were saying that he was the original Buddha.
Isn't that's wild? Yeah, that reminds me of all of the, like every medieval scholar was trying to make a connection to whoever they needed to Caesar, to
Well,
Zeus.
there was some weird stuff with Buddha's birth too. I don't remember exactly. Like Lao
Sure.
Tzu, I think, was born out of his mother's like it was like
He
armpit or calf or something.
Yeah, there's several stories based on
And
his birth.
yeah, and so the Buddha was also, I want to say, born like
Naturally,
not in like
sure.
a average way or whatever.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah,
some
well,
in
he was
there.
a Siddhartha Gautama. He was a prince or a king, and then he kind of, he like transcended. Yeah, that's a different podcast episode. Um, but I just love that this was the person who wrote that was arguing with a Buddhist monk, and he wrote this as like, well, actually, this is how it happened, and it just totally reminds me of the medieval spats and these guys. What was it, Geoffrey of Monmouth, the Welsh writer, who was like, actually, everyone who's English is Trojan. Did you know that? Like everyone was writing these connections, just because they would, they just had the writing eloquence to do that. So that was the big thing I kind of wanted to cover, though, was that was the thing I wanted to find out. I was like, why, if we don't even really know, I mean, again, this name is just the Old Master. He does have some like other names that he's been given. I'm not an expert on the Chinese languages to explain that properly. Please, if someone can, please do. But the Lao Tzu, that's the name. He like I said, that'd be like me just being called Old Master. So if this guy whose name we don't truly even know, who we're not even sure existed, but we ascertain that he wrote this one piece, which has been this piece was translated from this time period, so like the 5th century BCE in China and in Japan for hundreds of years. It was such an influential piece. And then in 182 or in 100 BCE, we get Sima Chan's piece, that the historical piece that's mentioning it. I mean, it's really crazy to think about. And again, like think of Sima Chan as like a Virgil figure almost here. And in his importance of everything, connecting it. Poor guy, dude, didn't have a really good life. He got blamed for something, or he stood by someone after a military failure, was going to be killed. He decided to get castrated. Didn't
Oh,
like that, but he kept going. He kept writing. He became a court eunuch and wrote more. So kudos to you, Sima Chan, for sticking to your principles and just continuing on when it was really hard to be. But that's about all I have. I could go crazier into all of this. I know that there's a lot going on, but the Tao Te Ching, the important work by Lao Tzu, can't really be by him. There's stories and there's connections that don't really make sense. See, one thing Sima Chan even mentions in his historical piece, how Lao Tzu and Confucius met. They just totally like dapped it up, said, "Hey, what's up, brother?" I think they
yeah,
were trying to
I was reading something about that.
legitimize these connections. And I when I was reading through my things, they were trying to like, some people were trying to, in these time periods and today throughout the last 1,000 years, we're trying to legitimize Confucianism as some form of Buddhism, as Taoism as some form of Buddhism, and vice versa. Like all of these were trying to legitimize each other with the old ways, but that they're new, but they're not that new. They're actually just this. So I think that's kind of where we get a lot of the why we have so many of the hagiographies, because they were like, oh, I like these ideas, but like they're technically like not this tradition, so we need to like make these connections again, just like how these medieval guys did, especially once they needed to Christianize everything. So I really like this. I'm glad that you were able to find a nice story, Cammy, and I'm glad you were able to talk about this. I hope everyone here has enjoyed it and learned a little something from it. I think that's about all I have to talk about with it. I could go on, of course, but did you want to add anything else before we left?
Sully's really enjoying this,
Uh,
Bryant. So
right. No, I can totally tell. Yeah. Well, everyone, I think this one should be, I think, the second one of the new year, right?
yeah, it should.
So I hope everyone's enjoying their new year so far. We're going to continue to keep hitting episodes weekly. Let us know if you have any topics you'd like us to cover. Mythstorie with an IE, all in one word. Facebook group is there, YouTube channel, all podcast services. You know the drill. So I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
Oh,
Oh, we have a dog. Come on.
you want to do it? No. Okay.